How would we use ForeFlight for search and rescue? Well, the important thing is if you're a CAP member, if you're a CAP pilot, make sure that you use the CAP provided ForeFlight. Not just because it's free, but because it has extra features that no other ForeFlight will have, because our CAP ForeFlight is actually the Air Force ForeFlight, which has features that the Air Force wanted, and they're very useful for us. Well, we will start with how to set up your ForeFlight for search and rescue. Then we will talk about useful tools like AGL altitude, hazards advisor, bullseye. Then we will talk about how you can use ForeFlight for signal null method. And in the end, we will talk about setting up different searches in ForeFlight. Well, first of all, how to set up your ForeFlight, because you need to enable the features we need. And there are two features that you need to enable. If you go to settings, you need to find SAR features and turn them on. And then also you need to find bullseye feature and turn it on. After that is done, you want to add cap grid to your layers, and you would go to your layer selection and make sure that cap grid is active. Then you can see the cap grid overimposed on your map, and you don't have, it doesn't have to be sectional. You can have it over your IFR charts or even Garmin basic chart, because that's just a layer which would be overimposed over any map. Then you want to make sure that your instruments are on, and then when they're on, so that would be the button that controls it, and then you will have a line of different fields on the bottom, and all those fields are customizable. If you click on the square, you can select what you want to see there. So one of the things we want to see there is height AGL. So you would pick an space on that line where you want that number to be shown. You would click on it, and then you will select it in the menu. And here it would be your height AGL, which is very important when we fly at low altitude. So you don't need to keep track of what's the elevation is below you and things like that. You just glance on your tablet and you immediately know how high above the ground you are. Another useful feature is hazard advisor. It's also a layer, and unfortunately, you can only have either your radar or satellite or hazard advisor. You cannot have both. So that's, I guess that would be a limitation, but at low level, hazard advisor is definitely more useful than radar. And you still can have radar on your Garmin avionics. So what is a hazard advisor? Well, it's just a tool that can highlight the terrain which might be an issue. And you have worked with it already using Garmin avionics. The difference with ForeFlight is in ForeFlight, it's customizable. So when you select your hazard advisor, you will see a cog or sprocket here. And when you press on it, you'll see your settings. And then you would go hazard altitude, and then you would select custom there. So after you have selected custom, now you can actually select the altitude for red color and altitude for yellow color, because in Garmin avionics, red is always 100 feet or less above the terrain or above the obstacle, and yellow is between 100 and 1,000 feet above that terrain feature or obstacle. While in which 1,000 feet is good, but 100 feet is not very helpful because according to CAP rules, we need to be at 1,000 feet, but we can descend to 500 feet AGL for to investigate something. So let's say you're doing your search at 1,000 feet, and then you see, maybe you see smoke, or maybe you see glare in the trees. So you would descend to 500 feet minimum altitude and circle that point to see if it's your target or not. And after you have done it, you need to climb back to 1,000 feet. And you can select 500 feet for your red color. So now you know that if you see something red below you, you need to climb immediately. Also, when we do searches at night, it's 2,000 feet AGL instead of 1,000 feet. So you can change your yellow color to 2,000. So when things starts to get yellow at night, that means you need to climb. Now, let's talk about bullseye. Well, first of all, what is bullseye? Bullseye is an established reference point from which the position of an aircraft can be determined as radial distance. It could be any point from the database or a user-created point. And that's something the Air Force has been using for a long time. For them, it's convenient because, well, operation security, you need to report your position or maybe a position of the target or anything of importance, but you don't want people who just listen on your frequency. If the frequency is not encrypted, they don't want to know what you're trying to tell. So you would select a bullseye, which only you and other people who are on a mission with you know what it is. And when you know what it is and you report radial distance, you can determine your position, much like you would determine your position of a VOR, for example. But if a third party doesn't know what the bullseye is right now, well, this information is not useful. And but for us, there are more applications for this feature than what I just described. And even though CAP doesn't officially use bullseye, this feature is very convenient. It's a convenient way of reporting position in relation to some prominent land feature, like when you interact with a ground team. Well, maybe they don't have a bullseye feature, but you can select maybe a tall mountain or maybe cell phone tower as your bullseye, and then you can just tell them that the target they're looking for is 5 miles southwest from that feature. Another way I personally use it a lot is that I would set an airport as bullseye, and then I always know how far I am from that airport and what's my position in relation to it, which is convenient. Let's say you're doing a search close to an airport and you would be monitoring its CTAP frequency, and well, you hear that someone is about to take off, so you can immediately report your position to that person using bullseye because you see how far you are from the airport and your radio in relation to it. Well, you don't have to say that you're 273 degrees, but you can say that you're west. Let's say you're 5 miles west, maneuvering at low altitude. Another good use for that feature is when you fly an instrument approach. And when you fly an instrument approach, your avionics would be giving you distance to your next fix. So it's if you want to know what's your distance to the airport, you will have to basically add distances. Like if your next fix is your runway, it's easy. But if you have 3 more waypoints on the way and you see only the distance to the next one, it's not that easy to tell how far you are. But if you selected the airport as your bullseye, you just look at your tablet and you know that you are 7 miles from the field, and you can do a report on CTAF. And also some missions, when we do some missions with the Air Force, like Goldfish, which we did last summer, they wanted us to report our position using the bullseye feature, because for their training, they basically wanted us to act as a AWACS, or as a airborne control asset. So, and they didn't have it for their training, so we would pretend that we're like an airplane flying somewhere and giving them information where the target is in relation to bullseye. So remember that we already have enabled it when we were setting up our ForeFlight for search and rescue. So now if you click on the map, well, you will click and hold any point on the map, you will see this menu, and you can, well, first of all, you can set up that point as bullseye, but you will also, if you already have bullseye, you will see that telling you that, well, whatever you clicked is 49.1 nautical mile on a 318 radio from the bullseye. And in this example, your bullseye is Harrisburg International. You can, using that, you can use your, any feature can be bullseye. Like you click on Reidsville Airport, Mifflin County, and you would set it as bullseye. Or you can click on an obstacle, you can set it as bullseye. You can even go to your flight plan and click on the waypoint, and then you'll see bullseye in the menu. You can also create a waypoint using bullseye. So bullseye would be B. So if you want to create a waypoint, so you see I made Mifflin County Airport as my bullseye, and I want to create a point which would be on 322 radio 5 miles away from it. So I would put B 322005, and here's the waypoint which ForeFlight created. Another thing, remember I told you that I can use bullseye to know my position in real time. So that you need to set up one of those instruments. You would click on whatever square you want to use, and then you would select bullseye in the menu. And after you have done it, now you will have your radio and distance shown to you in real time. And that's what I would use when I would approach an airport. For example, I would select the airport as bullseye, and now I know how far I am to that airport, even if this airport is not in my flight plan or I'm on an instrument approach. That's what I would use. Now let's talk about signal null method. And so as a refresher, signal null method is that, so we have antennas on the airplane. On our Cessnas, the comm antennas are on top. The idea of signal null method is that if you enter a steep turn and start flying in circles, at some point the airplane itself will block the signal. And so if you're listening to an EOT, for example, you will hear an interruption in the transmission because your airplane blocked the signal. And then since our antennas are on top, that means that when you get an interruption, that the direction to the signal should be 90 degrees to the outside of your turn. So if it's a left turn, it would be to the right of the heading you were on when you heard the interruption. Well, now let's say we determined the direction. Now we want to plot it on the map. And back in the days, it would be an observer with a paper chart and a ruler and a pen, and the observer will plot a line. Well, fortunately, you can do the same thing in ForeFlight. You have a ruler tool. And so remember, if you put 2 fingers on the screen and hold, you will get that tool, which will tell you your magnetic heading, distance between those 2 points, and then on the other side, you will have reciprocal to it. So what you would do, you would enable that, well, bring up that tool. It will start from your position, and then you would move the other finger to make that number whatever you determine the direction to the source of the signal is. And then you would use your pen tool and you will activate it, and then you will draw a line over this ruler using it as a ruler, like you would do with a pen. And here you go, here's your line. And then you would do another window in a different point, and then you will repeat, and then you have another line, and then you will do it one more time. Now you have 3 lines, which, well, 2 lines will also intercept, but the more lines you have, the more accurately you will determine the position. And it doesn't have to be, you can use that method in not only in signal null method, but there might be other situations. For example, when we flew ForeFlight missions last spring, I would use that to determine the position of a smoke. Like you see smoke coming from the forest, and you need to know where it is. So you can put your important thing, not your nose, but your ground track on that smoke, and then you would use the method to draw a line, and then you fly to a different position, and then you would do that again, and you would repeat it several times, and then you will find where they intercept. And amazingly, I was able to determine the position of that smoke pretty well, because we ended up going to that smoke in the end, and it was very close. But of course, it has limitations. Like the further away the target is, the closer these other points are, the less precision you will get. But you still can get a ballpark. So, for example, we did determine approximate location of the smoke in New York State, because New York State, we don't have any mutual support agreement with New York State, but we still determined the position of the smoke in New York, and then the DCNR representative was able to call a friend in New York State and tell that friend that, well, you have fire approximately in that area. Now let's talk about searches in ForeFlight. So it also has search and rescue package, and fortunately for us, it has all the searches we need. And you would use it the same way you would use an instrument procedure. So you will click on procedure, and then you would bring, you will select search pattern in the menu, and then you will get this window. So again, you will click on the pattern to select what pattern you want. But an important thing, that when you have your track, it is true. Notice the T, degrees T here, that means it's true. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. Like if you're talking about doing something like, sometimes you're given directions in true north. For example, you're either planning section chief, or maybe your incident commander, they just opened Google Maps or Google Earth, and they used this distance bearing tool to determine a course, which is always, well, by default is true in Google Earth. or Google Maps, and they will give you that information in true north. So that means you don't need to do a correction or conversion. But if you want to do a search along a final of the runway, well, your runway is magnetic, so you'll have to convert it back to true. And then the rest you would do, again, all the parameters you were given would be entered here. And you see here it says creeping line, so it is a real creeping line. It's not parallel search. However, your initial track, and that's the important part, it's not the track you would be looking along. That would be the track of your first leg. So it would be always 90 degrees left or right from the direction of your search. And then you would add it. Well, you would click add to route. That's how it looks. And notice that the first leg is actually half the leg because that's a true creeping line, not a parallel search. And then after it's in your flight plan, you will see it as like it would be SAR creeping line. It wouldn't be a bunch of waypoints. It's just one thing. So if you want to delete all those points, you will just delete SAR creeping line entry. And another thing you can use, since you have your creeping line, and that's something you can also use in Garmin SAR package, is that you have your vector where you're going, and when you're in the turn, your vector becomes a curved line. So if you put the tip of that line on the point where you need to be, that means if you maintain this rate of turn, you will end up where you want to be. And you can use the same vector from Garmin. When you look at your airplane on maps, you will see the same thing that can bend left and right depending on your turn, and it will show you where you will end up. And the last thing I want to note that ForeFlight also has cap grid search, so you can select a cap grid and create a search without even knowing the coordinates of that grid.